Hi everyone, Chris here. I just wanted to let you know that we're expanding this season of The Wild to include 3 different types of episodes, so you'll be getting even more great content from us every week. First, there's our new series on America's national parks, coming out every 3 weeks. We'll also be presenting episodes featuring interviews with the sharpest minds in wildlife conservation, and dipping into our archives and sharing our favourite shows from the past with new commentary from me. Enjoy. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you might be familiar with our episodes on how to catch a cougar. For that show, I joined my friend Mark Elbrock as he tracked and captured and placed radio collars, GPS radio collars, on cougars in the Olympic Mountains. Doing that teaches Mark a lot about the cougar's habitat, the movements of them, their diet, a really valuable source of information. And as we were trudging up a steep hillside on that trip, we crossed over a small stream. And Mark turned to me and says, "You know, someday we'll just be able to take a cup full of this stream water and know every cougar that has passed through this area." It kind of blew my mind. Game changer. Could studying animals really become that simple? I didn't know it at the time, but Mark was referring to eDNA. It's a revolutionary bit of technology in ecological and biological fieldwork. And it's possibly a new frontier in us understanding the natural world. I wanted to learn more about eDNA, how it works, what it can teach us, and if the answers to saving our planet can be found in a cup of mountain stream water. From KUOW in Seattle and Chris Morgan Wildlife, welcome to The Wild. With me to answer those questions is Dr. Eily Andruszkiewicz Allan. She is the chief scientist at the eDNA Collaborative at the University of Washington. Good morning, Dr. Andruszkiewicz Allan. Can I call you Eily?
Good morning, Chris. And yes, please, just go ahead and call me Eily.
Thank goodness. Thank you. I'm glad you're not formal and demanding the full title. But Eily, amazing. I'm fascinated by this topic and I'm so dying to dive into these questions. I've got more than I probably should have, but it's just a topic that's been hard to get my head around. It is such a fascinating topic, eDNA. If you had 3 floors of an elevator ride to describe to someone what eDNA is, what would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So environmental DNA is, we call it, molecular bycatch. Everybody, everything is shedding DNA. You will find my DNA in this chair for a couple of days. Anything left behind, any kind of skin cells, detritus, feces. We talk a lot about poop in our lab and how useful poop is. And it allows us to see things that have been occupying that space, but, we don't actually need to put eyeballs on the animal. We can know that they were there just by what they've left behind.
And why is it eDNA versus DNA that they might use in a motel crime scene, for example?
It's actually, by the definition, the E is just environmental DNA. So what it means is we captured air or water or soil rather than actually touching the fish or the animal that shed it. So motel crime scene, I would classify as eDNA because we didn't actually have the thing that was there. We're capturing its leftovers.
I see. In the same kind of family of DNA studies.
Yeah.
And I think the best way to explain to our listeners how this works is maybe to talk about the first study that proved it could work.
Sure.
What happened at the Monterey Bay Aquarium?
Yeah, I love that study. And it was really an exciting time about 10 or 15 years ago. And at Stanford University, there were a couple of postdocs who both of which I know pretty well, as one is now my current boss. Kevin Yamahara and Ryan Kelly were at Stanford University, and they had a partnership with the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And there were some rumblings around the field that, we could get information from a cup of water, like you mentioned, and census all of the creatures that live in that water. So Kevin and Ryan went down to the Monterey Bay Aquarium And they went to a big tank with dozens of species. And the important thing is we know what species are in that tank. They scooped a cup of water and brought it back to the lab and processed them. And there's a great story from Kevin where he texted Ryan at 3 a.m. from the lab and said, "Houston, we have tuna." And that was sort of the beginning of that adventure. So they were able to find everything that was in the tank that the aquarium said was in there, and they actually found more species. And so they went back to the aquarium and said, "Well, we found everything and more." And they said, "Well, what else did you find?" And it turned out it was the food. It was the fish food. So that was really kind of the aha moment of how powerful this tool could be and finding everything that's in the water.
Wow. Houston, we have tuna. I will never forget that line. Let's break this down a bit step by step. So first, you collect a sample. Mm-hmm. How do you do that?
Yeah, most times we're just, like I said, we're mostly focused on water, and you just need about a liter. So think about a Nalgene bottle. You go out to your favorite creek, your favorite pond, your favorite ocean, and you're collecting that water sample. There's nothing special about it besides making sure your bottle is clean and then capturing that water. The next part is how we actually concentrate the DNA. And so in that liter of water, we've got lots and lots of DNA, and it's very tiny. So we put it through a very fine filter. So we're talking usually 1 or 5 microns. So super tiny filter that's going to capture all the DNA in that water. And then we move on to the lab. But the collection piece is definitely relatively straightforward. Just grab a bottle and go.
So it sounds like most of your eDNA research is done in water, but it can be done on land too. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's collecting DNA from a creature, but the creature doesn't even have to be there while you're collecting it, right? Is that a fair description of the process?
That's perfect. And in soil samples, there's been some work with camera traps, and you can kind of some ground truthing where if you have a camera trap and a cougar walks by, if somebody goes and runs out and grabs soil an hour later, can you detect that cougar was there from the soil? And so there's some kind of ground truthing from there. But that's exactly right.
The fact that you could get a remote camera picture of a cougar and then scurry in there within an hour, pick up the soil that its paw was placed on and capture some kind of eDNA from it is mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. What is it that's in that soil that the cougar has left behind is one question. And how tiny is it? And how do you filter that? How do you get it out of the soil?
Yeah, it does feel like magic. Some days it feels like our lab instruments are just black boxes that do voodoo magic. But we've seen it over and over again, and it's tried and true. But likely in the soil sample, it's skin cells. That cougar is leaving. It's walking and it's leaving, or hair. Anything that would be coming off of the cougar and staying in that soil sample. It's very, very tiny.
And have they managed to do that? Is that a reality?
Yeah, the soil work is definitely moving in the same direction of kind of trying to figure out when and where, but it's the ground truthing is there. But there's been a lot of work there. And air, there's a really similar study to the aquarium where there was a zoo in Europe and they put an air filter, which is just kind of think of an air filter in your house if you were filtering on a bad air quality day. They put it in the zoo, and same thing. They were able to find almost every species of exotic animal in the zoo and more. They found domestic dogs and cats and rats in the streets, and in addition to all of the rhinos and zebras and birds and amphibians in the zoo. So there's proof of concept with air as well. And again, same types of questions of how to use the information, but the proof of concept is there.
How do the dogs and orangutans and rats feel about their privacy rights when it comes to this stuff?
That's a great question. Nobody signed a waiver, as far as I know, in that study. But the privacy thing is, I think we're coming to a place where that discussion is going to need to happen as our technologies get better. Right now, the way the technology works is we can say there was a dog here, but we don't know which dog. And so we often find human DNA. But all we can say is in my water sample, I found a human, but I don't know that it was Chris Morgan or Eily Andruszkiewicz.
Well, I want to circle back to that towards the end, but I need to understand some of the basics first. I do a little bit about your background, Eily.
Yeah.
This seems like something out of science fiction. It really does. It's hard to even grasp.
Yeah.
How did you get into working with eDNA initially? What was that story?
Yeah. So I was a high-achieving, nerdy undergraduate, and I had a professor say to me, you should try research. And I thought, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing graduate school. I'm going to get a job and, do something else. And then he said, there's a really cool project, that I think you would enjoy. So I said, okay. And the project was using environmental DNA. And so there's a really cool facility at the University of Notre Dame has like synthetic streams. They're all linked, and they have a bigger stream and a smaller stream and a wetland. And we started releasing DNA from, we had a bunch of fish in a tank, and then we would bring that water that had a bunch of DNA in it to this field facility, and release it and see how far downstream we could still capture that DNA and how it changed with, if there was biofilm, if there was gravel versus sand and all that kind of stuff for some stream dynamics. And I just got hooked immediately. It was, again, like you said, it feels like magic. You take a bottle of water, it looks clear, it looks fine, and then you just have a wealth of information and you can see fish in there.
Amazing. Is it something in your personality that drew you to this particular kind of work?
Yeah, I've always loved the outdoors. I grew up, in going to rural New York there's still no cell service, 100 people in the town, and on a beautiful river. And so I definitely have always had that inclination of doing environmental work. That was kind of what direction I was planning on going in. My degree is civil and environmental engineering. So sort of in that field, looking for working on something that's towards bettering the environment, but very kind of action-oriented.
It sort of combined a whole bunch of your loves and passions.
Exactly.
And the way your brain works by the sound of things.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you had that experience at Notre Dame and you were witnessing how a sample of water could be taken here on a creek and then lower down and analyzing the eDNA in it. Mm-hmm. What was it that you thought that made you go, oh, this is it. This is what I want to do. I see this and want to be part of it. What was it?
I think a lot of it was recognizing the power, but also seeing how nascent the field was. Like seeing that this was the tip of the iceberg. Like we were going to go so much further with this technology, and there was so much room to grow. There was so much excitement. And just being a part of it from the beginning was also really, really enticing for me. And again, besides the match of skill sets, just thinking, well, we could try this. We could look at this. There's a lot of directions to go. And there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle that we still, 15 years later, don't quite have yet. But the progress that we've made in that time is huge. And to be a part of it from the beginning was also kind of the cherry on top for me.
We'll get to some of those specifics because I love hearing how it can be applied and what that involves. How did the research that you've done add to that aquarium study? Yeah.
So I did a lot of work in my thesis around how long the DNA signal can last. So if we went an hour after the cougar was there, we'd feel pretty good about detecting it. If we went 24 hours later, maybe we're getting to the kind of the edge of that detection, right? I dipped my toe into oceanography. And in a river, it's a lot easier to conceptualize. If the fish is here, the DNA will flow downstream with the water. And so when we grab a water sample, we know the fish was here or somewhere upstream. In the ocean, you've got a lot going on. You've got tides and currents. You've got vertical mixing. So I did some work with oceanography around, given a point source of DNA, like a school of mackerel, where will that DNA go? With the idea being, when we take a water sample, we actually want to go backwards in time and say, if I found tuna DNA the tuna was likely south of here, and it probably wasn't more than a kilometer away, sort of getting towards honing the tool to be more useful in that way.
Did you want to be a detective as a kid? I mean, come on. This is all detective work, basically. The backtracking, the mystery. Where did this start?
Exactly.
Where was the animal at this time of day?
Yeah. Yes, I loved Clue and all of those games. And this is just a grown-up's version of Clue. I get paid to play Clue with fish and dolphins and all kinds of fun stuff.
Amazing, amazing. I've done a lot of field work over the years with land mammals mostly, and it can be pretty invasive. And this is one of the things that just springs to my mind, when sometimes you have to sort of create momentary harm or stress to an animal to collect data or radio collar an animal But what we can learn from those interactions, from those moments of stress on the animal and the biologist doing the work, can protect a whole species on a large scale. How is eDNA changing the way field biologists are doing their work?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think this is a good place to say we talk a lot about it as a complement because, like you just mentioned, sometimes you need a fish in hand or to have your hands on the cougar and put the radio tag on it. But the big excitement about eDNA is it's not invasive. And so we talk about the three big things we call endangered species, invasive species, and species of commercial interest. There are a lot of cases where you don't want to harm the thing you're trying to keep track of. So endangered species is the perfect example of if we want to count how many of our last few darters are left, let's grab water. Let's not grab the darter. And, we can see an indication of their presence because they are shedding DNA. If they are there, their DNA will be there. So the non-invasive nature of sampling is huge. That being said, it's not going to solve every ecological problem. There's some times where you will need to measure the fish or determine sex or size ratio. For example, stock assessments of a commercially valuable fish like hake. There's times where we can use eDNA to get an indication of presence and abundance, and there's times where we need nets in the water to be capturing and counting hake. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely. It's complementary. It's not like a silver bullet to solve the world's problems when it comes to biodiversity, climate, and all the rest of it. And we'll get into that. It is interesting to hear that it's complementary versus it's not necessarily going to take over what field biologists do these days.
Right.
And there's always going to be a need for that. Can you give me some specific examples of the types of applications that eDNA has been able to help?
Sure. Early detection of species is a great example of eDNA. So those invasive species, if you're looking for 1 in a million, water samples are easier to grab than the traditional tools of a person looking or some of the more traditional methods.
Catching an invasive species arrival before it gets out of control and costs a lot of money.
Exactly. Yep.
Are there examples of that? What type of species? And can you give me some specific field examples of that type of stuff?
So locally, European green crab are an invasive species, and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife is really concerned and has a whole monitoring program. I'm not sure how long they've been doing this, but they have the crab team, and they have a bunch of volunteers, an enormous amount of volunteers. It's a really impressive workflow that they go out and set traps and collect the traps and look for European green crab. And about 4 years ago, there was a graduate student here at the University of Washington, and she said, well, why don't we take water samples and look for green crab by eDNA? And unfortunately for Abby, it was right during COVID. So she had this whole plan of sampling water with all these citizen scientists and, joining forces with the crab team that already existed. And then COVID hit and she did it solo. So she drove around and collected hundreds of water samples, and she was looking in those water samples. She would filter them, look for environmental DNA from green crab, and she found a really interesting pattern where she could always detect DNA when there were crabs in the trap, but in some places around Puget Sound, she was finding DNA where there were no crabs in the trap.
Wow.
This is, again, the benefit of early detection. The trap has to be in the right place at the right time, And the crab could be a meter away, but not walk into the trap. But from your water sample, if the crab is a meter away from the trap, if you grab your water sample, there's probably going to be crab DNA in your bottle.
There's no
right?
getting away with it anymore.
The DNA can't hide. So she also did a really nice job quantifying sort of effort, like where does it help you, and where does DNA help you besides trapping? If you're already putting out a bunch of traps, you probably don't need DNA because you're probably finding crabs, right? But how many bottles of water do you need to grab for that information to be really valuable towards your goal, which is early detection of a species? And so one hypothesis is that the crab larvae can be transported with ocean currents. And so that invasion front moving, again, if you put traps out, you wouldn't be catching crab larvae, but the DNA can get you that early life stage. And then next year there might be crabs there. So it can really help direct sampling efforts as well. So places where the DNA was found but no animals were would be, kind of on your watch list to go put more effort to those places as likely indicators of that invasion front moving with an invasive
And what
species.
can biologists and conservationists and Fish and Wildlife Department, what can they do about it once that early detection is now in place through eDNA? What does that allow them to do?
That would help them make decisions about management, how they would manage it. And I'm no expert on invasive species management, but giving them information that they can make decisions faster is really key, especially for those time-sensitive things like invasive species. If they catch an invasive species after it's already established, it's much harder to manage it and to remove it. But if they're on the early front of that detection and they know that it's coming, I think they can implement sort of cheaper and more successful management decisions that can prevent or slow that invasion in a way that doesn't do as much harm on the ecosystem.
Back to the examples in the field, because this is where I think it's going to get concrete for our listeners. What did eDNA help you understand when it came to getting salmon across the road?
That's a great question. Why did the salmon cross the road, or could the salmon cross the road? So this was another really sort of applied, useful management application for environmental DNA. So in the state of Washington, with this large court case that settled and ends up with the state paying billions of dollars to replace culverts that were blocking fish passage, the amount of understanding of whether or not these culverts are blocking fish passage, which fish are being blocked, are the replacements actually helping restore fish passage, is all kind of questionable. So we put on our eDNA scientist hats and said, this is a great use for this tool. We can go and monitor at a pretty low effort in time and say before and during and after a culvert replacement, do we see first in the before stage, were the salmon able to get past the barrier or not? In this case, the culvert that goes under the road. How does the construction is a big, there's bulldozers in the water. It's a big environmental impact. And all these consulting companies do environmental impact assessments and reports. But what happens to the salmon during that period of construction, which can be many months? And then post-restoration, how well is the new culvert working? So we took 5 creeks up in Bellingham and went to them for just about 18 months. Some of them had culverts that were able to be passed by fish, some did not, and then 2 had construction projects. So we were able to see that during construction. And what we found was in the two culverts that had construction projects in that 18-month time, one of them didn't look to be a barrier in the first place. So it looked like the salmonids that we were interested in, which are the key species in Washington, were able to get past the barrier in the first place. It didn't look to be a major blockage because we could find their DNA upstream. And then the other one, certainly there was a blockage. Their salmon DNA was not found upstream. And though the construction project was disruptive, post-construction, it looked like the salmon were able to get up.
Really?
Yeah. We would like more post-monitoring time points, but that's the scientist's answer is we always want more data to support that.
And that's an easy thing, though, right? A scoop of water here and there, and it gets you your answers, does it?
Exactly. And, that was really the goal of that project was not just to do the science part, but to demonstrate to government agencies that make management decisions, this is a scalable, easy-to-use tool that could fit in your management toolbox.
Little side question. Has it made you stop drinking water from a creek, this work?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, the Colfort study had another fun thing, going back to your love of cougars and camera traps. The other really fun thing about this is we can detect terrestrial mammals in water. And so we can see who's been around, who's been drinking in the water, who's been eating fish out of that water. We get birds, we get mammals. And one of our sites had a camera trap, and we only went once a month. But it happens that the day before we sampled 1 month, the camera trap had seen a bobcat. And then we were like, the Washington Department of Transportation had a webinar of their camera trap stuff, and they were talking about it, and they said, and then we saw a bobcat in April. We went back to our field notes and we said, oh my gosh, we were there a day after the bobcat was there, and we pull up that water sample, we go to our results, and sure enough, bobcat, there it is, right in our data. So it was a really nice moment, and I think again.
And what did that feel like?
Man, it feels good. It feels like again though we have so much confidence in it, it still feels magical, which is a fun place to be. But yeah, we joke that when we get sequencing data back, it's like Christmas morning. You're opening presents. Each sample is a present, and you see what's inside, and you see, the number of birds that we can detect, and we get all kinds of, beavers and raccoons and all those little critters that are hanging out by the creek. And another month we had a carcass that was, honestly, I almost vomited. It was maybe the most horrible smell I've ever smelled in my whole life. This was my least favorite day of field work. And it was undistinguishable, just dead carcass on the side of the creek. We processed the water samples, and lo and behold, huge signal of raccoon. And I'm like, well,
really?
We found a dead raccoon. Mystery solved.
But it's just so gratifying to know that Mark Elbrock, my cougar biologist colleague, wasn't BSing me when he said, yep, scoop of water from this. I've thought about it since, and it was maybe 4 years ago now. And I've never been able to get it out of my head. Was that true? Is that possible? And it's so great to hear you say,
it's
yes,
amazing.
True and possible.
Yeah. One other short example that is kind of really fun and cool is there's been some work out on the Olympic Peninsula as well on looking at species moving further and further upstream as temperatures rise in streams. So John Hagan works with the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. He's a biologist for them, and he's backpacked way deep into up in the park and all over the Olympic Peninsula. And what he's found is he's documented presence of salmon further upstream than they ever have been found by DNA. And he's been watching the historical temperature rise as you move upstream with global warming. And so he's looking at range shifts. And so he's saying, we used to only find salmon no further north or upstream than here, but now they're creeping up, right? They're trying to get to that cooler water to spawn.
So that makes me wonder, can you do this in an automated way where you don't actually even have to be there to take the scoop of water?
You can. This is an exciting frontier in the field. There's been a lot of work and a lot of sort of commercial interest in automated sampling. So it is as simple as scooping water and filtering it and preserving that filter. So there's a suite of low-tech to high-tech automated samplers that are coming out onto the market. And for places that are hard to reach, if you're backpacking in, 2 or 3 days to get to your field site and then setting it up, and then you're able to control it remotely and then go back a month later and get 50 samples, that's a win.
doesn't sound as fun as doing field work. Like, I've got to say, does it take the fun out of field work in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, it does, but I would say it transfers the fun to that, the processing side. Like I said, when we get back a file and we open it up and we say, oh my goodness, we saw a humpback whale, or, so I think it transfers it. And there is no replacement for field work. I'm with you. I've got to get in the field and get my boots wet.
You just kind of blew my mind with the applications for this. I can think of like 5 in the last month that I could think, right? So we were just down in a place called Ash Meadows in Death Valley National Park. Highly endemic, a level of high endemism. Tons of species there, 70 or so, like the Galapagos in the middle of the Mojave Desert. Amazing stuff, right? It's like places like that were actually destined for development, but that was shut down because of these endemic species and endangered species in the area. It's almost like you could just dip your finger in the water or in the earth anywhere on the planet and go, yes, this is okay to develop because there's not many species here. Definitely not this one because there's a range of endangered species. Oh, this one's threatened. Right? I mean, it seems unbelievable.
Yeah. So I love the endangered species application. I love, national parks. I feel like this is the perfect tool of, these are by definition our most sacred places. This is what everybody goes to enjoy the beauty and the wonder and the amazement of the things that live there. And for this tool to be, again, we can filter the water and put it right back. We're just capturing the DNA. Like, we're not even taking water. We're just filtering it. And so this just feels like a place where, again, just knowing more. I don't think that we've fully conceptualized the wealth of information. Where our brains are, as scientists, our brains are so used to the types of data that we've collected in the past, which is visual counts or net counts or something like that. And I don't think that we have fully shifted to the types of questions we can answer given
Where
better
is that tipping
data.
point of people going?
I mean, the tipping point is what I have been hammering on for 15 years, which is the gee whiz. Here's everything that we found in our water sample is still amazing. Where were they? How long ago were they here, and how many? And those are the three key questions that I think once even 1 or 2 of those is answered, then I think we tip. Of if we can tell you, and it's not going to be exact, but if we can give you bounds on that. I found beluga whale in my sample. It was when I can hand that back to you and say, Chris, a beluga whale was here within 6 to 12 hours. And probably within 500 to 1,000 meters. And it was probably 3. That's, I think, when the tool has really solidified and the investors come running, hopefully.
I narrated a film recently called Collision. And it was about how many large whales are struck and killed by ships every year. 10 to 20,000 large whales killed by ships every year around the world. Yeah. I read about something about the U.S. Navy using eDNA. What is that project?
Yeah, so actually that was the meeting I came to right before this. We have been working with the Navy on trying to develop molecular tools for detecting marine mammals. And the Navy is super interested. They really want to map where mammals are and try to avoid harm to those mammals. They're hard to look for visually. A lot of them don't come to the surface. So using DNA, again, like not needing to actually see the thing to know its presence is a real useful aspect of eDNA for mammals. Because it's rare, it's also hard to work with for DNA, because when we go to the ocean and grab a liter of water, almost all the DNA is bacteria. A small amount of it is from vertebrates. And then of the vertebrates, whales are also very small percentage of that. So they're a rare target. Rare things are always hard to work with, and so they are molecularly as well. We're working on a project here at UW in collaboration with NOAA, actually the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, and UC San Diego, to work on the molecular methods. So trying to make sure that we have the best chance. When we grab our water, we have the best chance of finding whale DNA in there if it's there. We're trying to make some maps for them. We have a lot of water samples that have previously been collected all up and down the West Coast. And we're reusing those and trying to develop maps of kind of where whales generally hang out. And then my favorite is we have dolphins in Hood Canal. I'm not sure if you know this, at the Bangor base over.
Wow.
So there are dolphins there that we call them the secret dolphins, but they are no longer classified. But they are non-native, and so on the science side, it's a really unique opportunity where, to my previous ramblings about how far does DNA go, there are non-native dolphins that live on the Navy base at Bangor. So if we go out somewhere else in Hood Canal and find that dolphin DNA, we know where it came from because there are no Atlantic bottlenose dolphins here. They are non-native. So we've been using that as a test case for this question of how far DNA can be transported. And some of our preliminary stuff shows 2 or 3 kilometers. So 2 or 3 kilometers away, we find dolphin DNA and we know where it came from.
That's mind-blowing again.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to come down from this conversation. I will not sleep for a week.
I mean, I wake up and think about this every day, and I still find it exciting, frustrating, unbelievably cool, promising, and then it's all of the above.
Let me come back to something
really.
because I want to make sure we pinpoint it. Where does the Navy come into that plan for mapping through eDNA different species around the world? What's the Navy? Are they interested in it, or did you guys approach them to say, "Hey, would you help us out? You got a lot of ships in the ocean. How did that work?"
You got a lot of ships. They actually do. Like I said, I really did not appreciate how much research and development they do, and they've been funding eDNA work for quite a number of years now. My understanding is for them, it is worth spending a lot of money on research and development because they are so concerned with mammals, and they have a lot of issues with. So they've been doing a lot of work on with acoustics as well, and they've been funding that for a long time because they really need. They're just trying not to blow up whales, which, I don't know if we can say that quite exactly on this.
Why are they concerned about whales and mammals?
My understanding is they do a lot of testing that can cause harm to marine mammals, and so they spend a lot of money on trying to not harm them. But if they do harm them, it's really bad. It is a big problem if they blow up a whale or, put an acoustic signal out that physically harms any kind of marine mammal. The Marine Mammal Protection Act is a serious piece of litigation. Navy is a government agency, and so they are investing a lot in any type of tool that will give them any more information than they have now about marine mammals.
It's all for the safety of the marine mammal. That's amazing. This is sounding so great.
Yep.
I love this. There's a lot of talk right now about the good and bad uses of AI. It seems like there could be a similar debate here. It's a pretty big privacy concern. If someone could track where I've been by sampling an air filter in an office or in a fast food restaurant, or what do you think about these types of concerns?
Yeah, I think it's the right time to have the conversation about them. I think we're not in a place today, the technology is not in a place where I am concerned that somebody would be able to track where I have been because, like I mentioned, you would need really high quality DNA and you would need a database that has all of my information in it. Companies like 23andMe, the databases may exist, right? Like if I haven't yet done it, but if I had done 23andMe, my information, my genetic information is somewhere, on the internet. But I think in the next maybe 10 to 20 years, we will be at a place where we're able to recover higher quality DNA, and then privacy does become more of a concern. And when we talk about the benefits of reusing samples, that's also sort of concerning too, right? Because we can always go back. And so we're talking about reprocessing 20 years of air filters now that we know that we can detect DNA from air. And nobody signed consent forms that our genetic information is being captured in those public places.
Maybe 40 years from
filtered.
now, you could extract an old filter from a restaurant and say, Eily was there back in 2024.
Yep. And you could probably tell that I was eating steak.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Because, there's cow DNA. But the time to have the conversation is now. I think it's a combination of scientists, lawyers, people who have worked with ethics, bioethics in the past.
Trying to stay ahead of all this is always the issue, isn't it? Like with AI. AI seems faster. The evolution exponentially of AI technology seems like we'll never catch up. The legislation will never catch up with the science, the legislation that's needed. But it seems like time's on our side a little bit more with eDNA.
I think so. I think we've got some more milestones to hit before it becomes sort of imminent concern. And so there is some time. But starting the conversations now, having them early, kind of projecting into the future what it looks like the technology might be able to do in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and establishing some of the groundwork now to make sure that we don't get to a scary place in terms of
will you
bioethics.
care in 50 years if someone knows that you were eating a steak in Applebee's? Probably not, right?
No, probably not. I think that there's going to be the rare cases where it really matters, but if it matters, it matters. So,
how has DNA changed the way you look at the world?
Yeah, I have a really nerdy answer for that, which is every time I look at an Nalgene bottle with water in it, I think, what is in there? Like, you just let me have it. I'll filter it and give it back to you good as new. But no, I think, again, I think I touched on this a bit earlier, but I don't think my brain has fully comprehended, even though I've been living and breathing this for 15 years, just the power of the information, because our tools are a bit lagging. And I can see the light at the end of the tunnel and the horizon of how this is going to change everything. But it really feels like you are making the invisible visible. And it feels like it totally changes my worldview of the power at our fingertips. But I think in the last 5 years, even alone, we've all felt things like climate change so personally. You have these, no matter where you are in the country, you might have a really hot day and then a blizzard, or a really cold day and then spring is blooming the next day, or these crazy rainstorms, mudslides, you name it, And I think in the last 5 years, I personally have felt that acceleration. The world is changing and we are here, and how are we going to mitigate it? And so your question was, how do I see the world differently? I think that we're going to be using this tool to look at all of the creatures that we care about in this crazy changing dynamic world. And I don't know if there's going to be anything else that can scale quite to that ability that eDNA has to scale.
Don't you think that we're sort of beyond the collecting data process phase? And we know the Earth is warming. We know the biodiversity crisis is looming. We know that climate change is affecting us. Don't we need more action versus more collection of data?
I completely agree that we definitely need more action and less collection for the sake of collection. What I really think eDNA has an advantage of is the turnaround time between collection and action. So I think that is really that turnaround time from data in hand to making a decision is, I think, a selling point of why this technology might really help us with these big changes.
I love that answer. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? When all of these old applications, all these old methodologies of gathering this data take time, sometimes years, right? But a scoop of water out of a pond, a river, or the ocean, or a soil sample speeds things up. Like, that's an understatement of the year,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I don't mean to belittle the work that goes into processing samples, but the spin-up time of collection, once all the lab processes are in place and rolling, and then handing the information back to people making decisions, I do think this has the potential to be one of the quickest turnarounds.
In understanding our entire planet, by the sound of things, potentially. Last question. Sounds like eDNA gives you hope. Why does it give you hope?
eDNA gives me hope because we are really, it feels like putting a magnifying glass on something that we just couldn't before. Like, we have ways of looking at the world, and we've had those ways for a long time. And this just feels new. And in a period of big change and kind of a lot of scary scenarios that you can think of in your head, and all of our species that we care about and we know and we love and that we're concerned about, just having better tools at our fingertips to take care of those species. And it does give me hope that we will be able to at least stop decline, and monitor improvement, and if we have a remediation effort, have quantitative data showing us how our remediation effort worked. Pat ourselves on the back. We did something good for the environment, and we saw that change.
Dr. Eily Andruszkiewicz Allan. She is the chief scientist at the eDNA Collaborative at the University of Washington. The wild is inspired not just by nature, but by the people who work in it, love it, and protect it. The Wild is a production of KUOW in Seattle and Chris Morgan Wildlife, with support from Wildlife Media. This show would not be possible without listener support. You can help us continue to create this special immersive storytelling by donating to KUOW. Go to kuow.org/donate/thewild. Thank you. Our producer is Matt Martin. Jim Gates is our editor. The Wild is hosted, produced, and written by me, Chris Morgan. A very special thank you for their kind financial support to Jill and Scott Walker, Rose Letwin, Ellen Ferguson, Anna Kimball, John Taylor, Paul Lister, Bob Yellowlees, Barbara Stallman, and Barton Brooks. Our production team includes David Brown, April Craig, Marshall Eisen, Michaela Gianotti-Boyle, Tatiana Latre, Lucy Suchek, Cara McDermott, Amelia Peacock, Darcy Riggins-Schmidt, Brendan Sweeney, and Hans Twite. Our theme music is by Michael Parker. I'm Chris Morgan. Take care of yourselves. I hope we've inspired you and maybe given you some new things to think about as we spin around on this beautiful planet together.